Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name's Kenny Henderson. I have the pleasure of chairing this lunchtime session. It seems to be quite a small and intimate gathering. I'm going to ask a favour on behalf of Jane, because it's actually quite an interactive session. We're going to have lots of participation and get some real insight from the next 40 minutes or so. So, if you are in the back half of the room, can I ask a favour and ask you to come forward to the front 3 rows, please? Thank you. I'm not going to do the school teacher bit and say, come right to the front. But yeah, if you could come and join one of the tables at the front, that would be fantastic. Thank you. So, the session today, Jane is the Chief Insight Officer at Peoplestar. And yesterday evening, working in partnership with Emerald Works, released annual benchmark results. So the session today is really taking a bit of a deep dive into one particular element of that, which is the rise of the high-impact consumer learner. So I've prattled on enough, and we're running short of time, and you all have lunch to get to after this. So I'm going to hand over to Jane. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Jane Daly.
Thank you, Kenny, and hello to everybody. So it is about the rise of the consumer learner. I know I've got Back to the Future on the screen, but if you do want a copy of the full report, they are available either to download on the Emerald Works website, or they're on their stands downstairs, so you'll feel free to go and pick them up. But all of the evidence that I'm sharing with you today is cited in the report, but you don't need it for today. But just to let you know, in case you would like some bedtime reading, which is great. But yeah, I am Jane Daly. I partner with Emerald Works. Previous to Emerald Works arriving, which was very soon, I was Chief Insight Officer at Towards Maturity. How many of you are aware of the longitudinal study that Towards Maturity have been doing, which was a course started by Laura Overton? So a few of you in the room. So I was privileged to have this vast data lake. But one of the main changes that I made in going into Towards Maturity is not only looking at Towards Maturity's data, because if you only look at one source of data, you can, of course, have bias. So was really working with Professor Rob Breener in the Centre for Evidence-Based Management and looking at multiple sources of data. And being able to look at the empirical evidence, what's published from an academic perspective, of course, looking at the profession insight that Towards Maturity have been collecting, understanding the learners themselves and the impact that corporate learning environments and outside of corporate learning environments are making on learners in the global workforce, and also looking at business impact. So significantly change what we were looking at, and that's why this report is called Back to the Future. Now, previous to joining that, one of the biggest roles that I've done as a practitioner was Global Head of L&D at Marks & Spencer. And in that role was very lucky to look after 100,000 employees across the world, but it allowed me to understand scalability, but also speed and quality of capability in a very different way. And I'm going to explain that to you as we go through. And one of the reasons I wanted to come out and join an organisation like Towards Maturity, and I've been helping Laura with the study because I was a high-performing learning culture and a top deck, as Laura's used to call it. So even when I wasn't working at Towards Maturity, I was there in the background helping her shape some of this stuff. So that's the reason that I'm here today. So I'm just going to give you a very quick high-level insight into the report, and then we're going to do this deep dive into the consumer learner session. Now, before we do that, I'm going to do the thing that we always say don't do when we're in a presentation, which is please can you get your mobile phone out? And please can you go onto slido.com, put in this hashtag, because I want this session to be interactive. It's really important that we use the power of evidence in the room. So I've got some stuff to share with you, but I want to also make sure that it's tailored to the needs of the room as well. So if you go on and put Back to the Future 2, which is what this hashtag is all about, you will receive the first question. So hashtag Back to the Future 2, which is all about, this is a practice session. So let me make sure you're present. I know it's nearly lunchtime, but I just want to make sure. So we're just having a bit of fun with this session, and then we will get real. Fabulous.
So what's the code?
It's Yeah, it's Back to the Future too. Yep, lovely. So it's a word cloud that's building, and we're going to use this as we go through today, and there'll be some other forms of collecting data. Amazing. Kenny, you'll be pleased to see snowy Scotland, as it is today, up there, which is amazing. Fabulous. And also, once Slido gets used to us, it gets a bit faster as well. Amazing. Fabulous. I've just come back from Austria. I love it so much.
So is the size of the text in there related to...
Yes, so this is a typical word cloud. So the size of the text is related to how many people are saying it. Now, once you're in Slido, you can see a screen grab of this. Now you're in this hashtag as well. I promise you I don't work for Slido, but I do love it because it's great just to understand who's in the room. But how amazing have we got all these voices in the room. But let's keep going. So I'm going to get Bree to take it off for us. Thank you. So so just a very quick whistle-stop tour of the research, because I want you to understand the context of where the consumer learner has come from. So this year's report looked at 3 research perspectives. It looked back at the last 10 years, at the conditions today, and also did some advanced predictive analytics looking forward. And that's the first time we've used the vast data lake, the longitudinal study, which, as far as we're aware, is the largest and deepest and richest study in the world around what's working, what isn't in learning and development. Now, team that with the studies that we have that I mentioned to you in those 4 other streams, and it's a very powerful evidence set. But data without context and interpretation is of no use. So these were the kind of questions that we were asking. Now, the amazing thing about the data this year is that, I was on a mission, and I promised Laura that I would collect richer data and a higher quality of data, and that's exactly what we've done. Now, the data's coming from 83 countries around the world, and nearly 80% of those that take part in the health check, now under the wing of Emerald Works, are budget holders and senior stakeholders. So, the credibility and the trustworthiness is there. And the kind of things that we do to mitigate bias are in the report if you want to learn more. But when we look back at the last 10 years, where we've arrived is that we're actually in a negative balance. Now, what do we mean by that? We're in the red. We are spending like crazy. We are in Vegas. We are spending money on digital, on content, on L&D resource itself, and we're spending more and more time, but we're not getting anywhere. What's happening is we're having a transactional effect on corporate learning, not a transformational effect, which is what learning is actually designed to be. So we're doing lots and lots of doing, but it's actually having a surface impact, a quick fix impact, not a deep impact. So let's unpack that a little bit. You can find out a lot more in the report. Now, just before we do that, let me ask you, and if Bree brings up Slido, tell me what you would keep from the last 10. What do you think L&D should be keeping from the last decade? And again, it's a word cloud, so feel free. We did this at the launch last night, so it'd be really interesting to compare what came up. I think we've got about 40 people, so I'm just waiting for Slido to catch up with us. I think it's really interesting when you look at the patterns and stuff in here, and this is very different to what we saw last night, actually. Now, maybe, did you have a question? Sorry.
Yes.
Go on.
My phone is about to die.
Okay.
I have to go old school. How can we keep curation when it's not something that you can physically pick up?
Right, well, let's pick that up as part of the session in a minute, if that's all right. But it's a really good question. But it's interesting because what we're really talking about is democratization of allowing people to be empowered by learning is how I read curation. If you've got a different version of it, we can pick that up later. But let's carry on and show you a bit more of the insights. So when we look at the stuff that was up there, most of that was human-centric, all of the people stuff. The reality is, I've been in search for learning, and there's not a lot of human-centric stuff going on. There is pockets of it, but not enough in a scale for learning and development to get that value-added voice that they should be getting in business. And that's a real wasted opportunity, so we need to be doing some things quite differently. Where we are, if anybody is familiar with the transformation curve, which is what Towards Maturity launched in 2017, there are 4 stages of maturity. Maturity matters when it comes to impact on growth, transformation, productivity, and profitability. And where the whole of the study is ending up is in stage 2. Now, stage 1 and 2 have a transactional impact on business, not a transformational impact, which is really what you only get in stage 4. So the whole of our study, we are struggling to keep up, basically, is what this tells you. I'm just giving you a bit more data. If you look at this, this is not a new phenomenon. This downward spiral has been going on for a long time, and I'm only showing you a few years here. So the bottom line is where we're moving, and even 50 was stage 2, and we're going backwards. Now, the only area that's bucking the trend is high-impact learning cultures. Now, they are slow and steady, but the things that they're doing in these organisations don't have the biggest budgets. They are not have loads of resource, but they have a very different attitude and mindset, and I'm going to unpick that a bit for you. But slow and steady wins the race. They are much more patient, but they are focused on behavioural change. What this is really telling us is we're getting confused between access to content and learning itself. And they are 2 different things, because we're really pointing people to content, but it's not learning if we don't include reflection and application, and we're not measuring that. Now, in any way we look at it, our extreme pain points are getting even faster. We've got massive ambitions in L&D. The green bars, you don't need to read all of this, the green bars, and you'll get these slides as well, but the green bars tell you our ambitions. And if we look on here at growth and transformation, these are just a couple of measures that we pick up. The green bars are our aspirations, and the pink is where we're actually hitting them. So you can see the pattern here is we're really not doing very well on average. And if we look at the next area of productivity and profitability, things like speed to capability, again, we're not hitting the mark. So our ambitions are slightly less, but that's not good enough. We can't carry on like that. And these are the reasons that we're unable to keep up, as reported in the research. Can anybody recognise some of these in your organisations? Getting a few nods out there. Has anybody got none of these? Does anybody just don't have any of these? Anybody in the room? It's really interesting. Lots of things. Now, one of the biggest issues we found from hindsight is that we're working at a surface level and not a deep level. Now, the other thing is L&D have forgotten to look after themselves as well. What this spider diagram tells you in looking at 3 areas, which is the learning ecosystem, how well are we at utilising that? How well are we in terms of capability around our intent and adding value? And also the other area, which is all around learning guidance. How are we good at those things like curation? And what this tells you is we're going backwards. And that's not good enough. So we're forgetting to fit our own mask before helping others, which is really interesting. So let's get into looking at the consumer learner. So if we look at what's happening today, what we looked at is there were lots and lots of things that we look at. We look at every digital technology. There isn't one form of digital technology that alone is working in L&D. The way that it's worked can have a massive effect, but digital on its own is not the answer to our issue. And this is really interesting, but there is people that are bucking the trend. Those people that are able to make the deep impact and get under the skin of culture rather than digital are winning the game. And they're having a sustainable impact, not a quick fix. Now, don't just listen to me, because the forces of change that are coming our way are completely out of our control. We did 6 explorations on today. So we looked at culture, leadership, impact, the ecosystem, the consumer learner, and learning guidance. I haven't got time to share all of you, so we are going to deep dive into consumer learner now. Now, just before we do that, all of the models have been refreshed this year because maturity dies. So the transformation curve has become a cycle. And the only impact people are getting, that deep impact, is in level 4. And that's because they're thinking culture before everything else. Everything else becomes second.
What is level 4?
So level 4 impact is people that are able to impact growth, transformation, productivity and profitability. They're the only area of maturity that have any impact on those at scale at all.
And why is it a circle? Does it project that it should be going around? Or?
Yeah, so it's a cycle because if around the outside, there is surface impact.
Sure, but you get to 4 and then what? Then you get to 1 again?
Well, yep, if you don't do certain things, maturity dies. So even level 4 have to be aware they're not perfect. In order to stay there, they have to do some very different things. And I can't go into lots of detail here, but ultimately, there is an S-curve jump to make sure that you keep going around that cycle and keep on the deep impact. You'll find a lot more in the report if you want to go into that. But today we're here to talk about the consumer learner. So how people consume learning is significantly changing. Today, only 10% of people use any form of data to actually understand their audience. They think they understand their audience, but when you dig deeper, the only data that is actually being collected is transformational data, often called happy sheets or users, things like that. That is not where you find learning. Now, all of you, I'm sure, know that concept. But what's happening is people behind the backs of L&D, and I can share you this data around, are spending their own money and their own time on learning. The average is now £12 a month in the UK of people spending their own money and around 4 hours a month on learning. So they're choosing. When they go into a corporate environment, the message is nobody has any time. And it isn't actually time, it's actually value. People don't value what's going on in corporate learning, but it is going on. If you talk to disruptors like LinkedIn, they can go into organisations and tell you what your people are doing, but most L&D professionals don't know that's going on. And you can look at some of that yourself with some open source areas. I'm sure you already are. So, indulge me with Slido again and tell me, if Bree doesn't mind putting it on using a poll, what kind of data that you guys collect. So we have a poll now. And hopefully it will switch on. Not working? Has anybody voted?
There we go.
Yeah, great. Just checking it was working. Patience, she says, we need. So in the room, you can see we're slightly out of kilter with the main set, which is only 10% of people that are using data. Today, only 47% of L&D people that are part of our study report that they analyse the need before recommending a solution. And the issue is they often analyse a training need, not a learning need, and there is a distinct difference. And actually what they should be analysing is the business need, a performance need, a productivity need, a capability need, whatever the need is. So we go wrong from day one. Now, it's really interesting because the only way we will be able to report an impact on things like growth, transformation, productivity and profitability is by partnering with the business, because they're already doing some of these things. And it's our job to partner with the business, with management, leaders, as well as people that are consuming learning to do this. So let's go back to the thing. But thank you for doing that. But it's only the combination of transactional and transformational data that will able to give us that information. Now, what has happened for us is that we have identified 6 habits and characteristics of people that have high levels of LQ. Has anybody heard of LQ? Anybody in the room? Can't see any hands. So there is a learning quotient, like there is a IQ, an SQ, an EQ. There is also a learning quotient. Now, some people have natural high levels of learning quotient, but they also, hold on one second if that's all right, but they also, this can be nurtured significantly.
What's an SQ?
So an SQ is a spiritual quotient. There's lots of cues. Now, if you listen again to, particularly as the way of the work is going, that we need to be more adaptable, LQ is becoming really important. People are starting to assess people that are maybe part of their agile workforce for levels of LQ adaptability. And as I said, the great thing is these can be nurtured. Now, these words here, I'm sure you have seen them, but they have come out of the data. They're significant because they have come out of the data. And people that show these habits are valuable. They're valuable because they're much wider than just performance. They have an impact on diversity, on well-being, and other areas. And of course, these are people that are naturally doing some of this stuff, and they are in your organisation with the same infrastructure problems, with the same challenges of different locations, with the same issues. But we don't know where they are, but they are going on. And we need to be using evidence to find out where people are and how we can help guide them and nudge them and nurture these characteristics, because these characteristics are really important. Now, the other thing to share with you is I mentioned earlier that there is a huge disconnect between what managers, learners and L&D. And this is not a new phenomenon, as you are aware, but let's just have a look at some of these. So these are self-reported by the learners themselves. So I'm not going to read all of these for you, but what you can see is around a 50-60% around, actually, I feel comfortable doing some of these things. Now, if we look at the same perspective from a manager is giving much higher levels of support. Now, you'll know this by some of the work that you do. So a manager has a perception that they're doing a lot more than actually is resonating with their teams. So we have to help people with that disconnect. Now, what's interesting is when we ask L&D think the learners are not good at doing this, and also the managers are not good. But this is absolutely going on. So we're not in touch with our learners. Now, this chart, there's a lot of data on here, and I promise you I will not, as it's nearly lunchtime, read all of this out, as much as I love this insight. What this is telling you is that L&D, again, are missing huge opportunities. If you look at the Office of National Statistics, it will tell you that there are more people who are entering the workforce over 50 than ever before, who are looking for reskilling and upskilling opportunities, because their work that they were a professional in or trained in is rapidly changing. And yet, what are we doing in L&D? We're not looking after this area of the workforce significantly. So again, it's a missed opportunity for us. And these people are the biggest growing area of areas like LinkedIn, Udemy, areas like MindTools, of these disruptive systems where you can pay for yourself, and in the background they're upskilling themselves. Now, we shouldn't worry about that. We should encourage it and think about things like individual learning accounts, which are working really well for organisations. But these are real opportunities. Again, not everybody is long-term employment anymore, and we're seeing a lot of those dropping. But just because you've been in an organisation for a long time doesn't mean that you don't need learning. In fact, research will tell you, as our jobs are changing, they probably need more. But we're forgetting about this area. And this is another perspective. So one of the things that is really important, who is looking at increasing self-directed learning? Just give me a show of hands. Is anybody in the room looking at self-directed? Well, I really urge you to read this report, because self-directed at the moment is a red herring, because we're pointing people to content. L&D have been reporting that they're overwhelmed and under-equipped, and we've now passed that problem by having systems where we're passing content problems onto the workforce, who now report that they are overwhelmed and under-equipped to do their jobs. So just by passing the problems on doesn't mean we're solving it, and we're not. So self-determined is the area we should be looking at. And if you look at any of the behavioural science, it's called heutagogy rather than andragogy. And there's a lot about this in the report. And again, if we look at people here, you can see those high impact learning cultures are winning on every area. So we're proactive in understanding what people need to learn to do their job. 5% at the lower level of maturity, 76% at the higher level of maturity. And every time you look at it, those cultural indexes are beating the odds every single time you look at it. 83 countries. 83 countries. Now, what's really interesting is those top performers. So when we come back to the high impact, I mentioned nurturing and nudging. So just constantly, just because you put something out there doesn't mean it's going to happen. They're really good at this, picking up some of those great things from marketing. But the marketing stuff is not enough because we're looking at behavioural change. But again here, just to pick one area here, we provide people with the means to prove capability for their job. How many people know their speed and quality to capability rates in the room? Does anybody report on that at all? Now that's a real concerning worry for me. Now as somebody, as an L&D leader at Marks & Spencer, I could tell you all of our capability rates, and in 1 year alone saved £12 million by doing that. In fact, it wasn't me that was recording them. It was the managers of new starters and joining up with probationary periods. It's a missed opportunity for L&D. We really need to think about how do we get people working at the top end of their job rather than not getting past first base. Right. Just a bit more data and then we're going to do some interactive stuff. High-performing learning cultures start with the end in mind. You'll see in here they are not perfect. But on every angle that we look here, they are winning. And they're winning because they're starting in a very different place and looking through very different lenses than other people. I'm going to show you those lenses at the end. But really thinking about increasing the appeal for digital learning for all ages. We can't forget the over 50s workforce. And I'm not just saying that because I'm over 50, I promise you. It's worth doing this. There are more people coming back post-retirement and saying, I'm really bored, I want to come back into the workforce than ever before. We mustn't forget these areas. It's a missed opportunity. So, I want you to talk to each other now. And I'm going to give you some time to do that. And then, if it's okay, if you're on your own, please go and join somebody else. But I just want you to let me know what is, 3 areas of insight that you believe you need to collect in order to increase advocacy. How do you get people shouting about the work that you're doing in corporate learning? Because learners are switched off. They don't believe that corporate learning is adding value. So how do we do this? Over to you for a few minutes. breathe, darling. Look at you, slide over quick. It's great to see some of the points. Just make sure one person on your table is capturing stuff. Give you another few minutes. That's amazing. There we go. Oh, God, excuse me. So 20 past, yeah? Right, okay. Kenny, should we wrap up? I want to make sure we keep these good people on time for lunch. Don't want anybody getting hangry with me in the room. Content is coming up as the number one. Now, let's just be really careful with content, because let's think about, how do you become an advocate of culture? You become an advocate because you feel connected to something. How many people could connect with content? Really? So I just...
So how many people connect? Sorry, Jane,
Yeah, no, it's good. Go for it. Go for it.
So it depends on what their connectivity is like. So, yeah, you present content on a bit of paper. My phone has died, so I've now got to get my alien laptop. But I came with a pen and paper to take notes in these wonderful talks that we're getting. But it's all about access to content. It's not the content itself.
Okay. No, and I think that's really important, because what we're doing is we're empowering people. But my worry is we're saying to people, just because you watch something or do something or absorb yourself in something, it means you're getting anywhere. So being self-determined means you need to look at content for a purpose, an intent. But apart from that, I mean, it's really interesting. I think the word advocacy is really important. I just want you to go away and reflect on that from this session. Because if somebody's an advocate of your corporate learning site, I was very lucky enough to work in Marks and Spencer. Anyone's said to me, even today, oh, you worked at M&S. They're famous for training. Famous, that there is just an ether about it. And it's really interesting that stuff is consciously out there. Great, right. Well, I want to finish the session for you. Thank you so much for doing that. So, the last thing we're going to look at is foresight. So I mentioned to you that we'd started to look forward at the next 10 years. So 2030, if you read all of the insight and scenarios, there are many scenarios out there, but 4 particularly that are being reported by the World Economic Forum and PwC that have done a really interesting longitudinal study that I would urge you to have a look at, because you should really be scenario planning in your own context now and starting backwards and saying, what if we could just be doing this then? What if we did have advocates? Because behaviour change takes time. It takes at least 66 days, often reported as 30, but if you do absorb yourself in the academic research and those studies that have been done in depth, it's on average 66 days at least. So we have to be patient and think about how we are measuring behavioural change and the impact that is having. And sometimes those seeds don't show for a while. And we just have to be patient, tenacious, and we need to keep going. Because once you get there, it's just so worth it, because the gifts are immense and they just keep coming. If you unlock and fertilise that ground properly, they just keep coming. And that's what we're seeing with those high impact learning cultures, who are able to just steadily carry on and do the stuff and keep up with the pace of change where other people can't. Today, we are not capable of helping our organisations, our functions, our teams, our people be capable in corporate learning. I can find no evidence of that. And that is not a new phenomenon. But where I am finding it is with high impact learning cultures, because they're making sure that the ground is laid. They are beating the odds. One last question for you before I leave you. What does L&D need to do differently to beat the odds in the next decade? What can we learn from the past and from today, from each other, that will allow us to have a very different story and value put on us in 2030? So we've got a few more people to report. Really interesting what's coming up. Fantastic. Well, I'm going to keep going. I really like the three things that are in the middle of I think we absolutely need to inspire and focus. And what we've got to do is ride on the waves. We are moving into an area of eco-world. Forget Disney World, we're going to be eco-world in corporate learning if you look at all of the research and predictability of what's coming. So organisations are going to be eco-centric, and learning needs to be self-determined. Please don't go down the route of self-directed. If people are not determined and don't have the will to learn, they won't. Inspire that will, encourage that will. But we can't make people love us, and we can't make people learn. They have to do that themselves. My last slide for you is there is a model in the report, +6 habits that people practice who do this really well. And our last and final slide is the messages in all of this: innovation in culture trumps innovation in digital every single time. Thank you very much.
Jane, thank you for a great session. Do we have time for a couple of questions? Yeah.
I'm fine.
Got any particular questions? I'm going to come over with the mic so that we capture it. Just jump through.
Just given the point around self-determined and given the current state when it comes to learning and all the different bits of content and ways to access it, how are you supporting those self-determined learners if the self-directed piece is a bit of a red herring? Because there's a lot out there, and is that to say that we're not looking at the data to help put the right content at the right time in front of those people, or...?
The first thing is to educate people that communication and learning are two different things. So just giving somebody access to content is not enough. So we have to, it's a bit like the 5 a day. I talk about it like the 5 a day. We need to educate people that that isn't learning. And it's great to use some of the philosophies of marketing, but it seems like we're going too far with that, and we're forgetting what learning is made to be behavioural change. The second thing is content can be amazing, but 91% of people want to learn with other people. So the most important things that we can do, content can come from anywhere. Let that happen. What we can do as guides of that is facilitate those incredible conversations and that sharing of knowledge, things that we as people are amazing at naturally. But that needs guidance. It doesn't just happen on its own. It's where we can curate, facilitate, inspire people.
Aware that we're running into lunchtime, Jane, I think, will hang around for a few minutes
Yeah,
if
I'm here
anyone
if you want me,
has any more questions to ask. If you haven't already done so and got a copy of the report, I think there's copies available on Emerald Works.
On the Emerald Works stand, or you
Stand.
can download it from the Emerald Works website.
If you've got a train journey that's 4 hours long like mine this afternoon, you might want to download it and read it on the way home. In the meantime, please give a big thank you to Jane.
Thank you.